In a silent Moscow hall, a young black woman calmly declares she speaks 9 languages. The room erupts in laughter. But by the time she's finished, a billionaire's empire will be trembling, and his deepest secret exposed. Snow clung to the windows of the old building as chandeliers cast cold light over velvet curtains and polished marble floors. The city's elite gathered for an exclusive gala. Bankers, ministers, heirs, and oligarchs. Men who believed no one could surprise them anymore. At the edge of the room stood Aisha, a young black linguist whose quiet composure masked a lifetime of discipline and hidden pain. When she announced, in flawless Russian, that she spoke 9 languages, the crowd erupted in mockery. But each word she spoke after that would become a blade, slicing through their assumptions, unearthing old crimes and buried family ties. What began as a test of skill would grow into a battle of power and conscience, where truths once whispered would echo across Moscow's marble halls and snowy streets, leaving one man exposed and one woman free. The hall was silent, except for the ticking of a clock somewhere behind the velvet curtains. The chandelier above glittered with crystals, though its light felt cold, as if it belonged not to the present, but to an older century. Dozens of faces were turned toward her. Men in black suits, women in furs, their voices stilled after the sudden ripple of laughter that had burst when she introduced herself. Her name was Aisha, and she was not smiling. "I speak 9 languages," she had said in her calm, measured Russian, every syllable clear. She had stood straight, her hands folded neatly in front of her, the only dark-skinned woman in that polished hall, the only one not born into this circle of power. It was Sergei Malikov, the steel magnate, whose face was known from magazines and televised debates, who had laughed the loudest. He was seated in the front, his silver hair trimmed close, his heavy ring glinting as he raised his glass. 9 languages? And yet here you stand, asking for work. What uses such a circus trick? His words had been smooth, cruel, in their softness. The others followed his lead, chuckling, whispering behind their hands. Aisha did not lower her eyes. Languages? She answered quietly. Are not tricks. They are keys. And keys open doors that men like you cannot even see. The laughter faltered. A hush spread slowly, as if her words had settled like snow across the marble floor. Sergei studied her then, with a look she had seen before, the gaze of a man too powerful to be corrected, but too curious to dismiss a challenge. He leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers once against the stem of his glass. "Show us," he said finally. She nodded. Switching without pause, she spoke in French, her voice fluid as water. She moved to Wolof, the syllables bright and sharp, carrying the echoes of her father's kitchen in Dakar. Then she slipped into German, clipped and precise, into Mandarin, measured and firm, into Arabic, rising and falling like call to prayer. Each tongue was not only sound, but posture, rhythm, gesture. Gesture, her very presence shifting as if inhabited by different lives. The hall was silent. At last she returned to Russian, her mother's language, and said, "Do not laugh at what you cannot do." For the first time, Sergei did not smile. His glass hung suspended in his hand. The applause that followed was hesitant at first, then firmer, though still edged with unease. They had not expected this. They had wanted a show, a curiosity. Instead, they had been shown their own ignorance, held up like a mirror in her dark, steady eyes. Afterward, as the guests drifted away into the night, their chauffours waiting in the snow outside, Sargai remained seated. Aisha was gathering her papers when his voice cut through the emptiness of the hall. "Stay?" he said. She stopped, turning slowly. He was watching her now with a gaze stripped of mockery. There was something harder in it. Suspicion, or perhaps interest. "You speak as though you've lived 100 lives," he said. "Who taught you?" "My parents," she answered simply. "Your father?" "My father taught me Wolof and French. My mother taught me Russian. The rest I learned because I needed them." He tilted his head. Needed? She did not elaborate. He rose, and the sound of his chair scraping the marble echoed sharply. "You intrigue me," he said, "and I do not like being intrigued." He slipped on his coat, adjusted his cufflinks, and added, "Come to my office tomorrow. Noon. If you are as useful as you claim, perhaps I will find a place for you." Then he left her alone in the great hall, the chandelier dimming above, the clock ticking its slow, deliberate rhythm. The next day his office felt like another world, walls lined with dark books, icons of saints gazing down, a samovar steaming in the corner. He did not greet her with warmth, but with a folder of contracts written in German. "Translate," he ordered. She did. Her pen moved swiftly, her mind switching as easily as her tongue. She not only translated but clarified, untangled the dense legal jargon, marked where the German text carried hidden conditions. When she finished, she slid the papers back to him. He read silently. His jaw tightened once. Then he closed the folder. "You noticed the clause they buried," he said.
"Yes."
"You've saved me $3 million. His eyes rose to hers. "And yet you stand here in borrowed clothes, living in a rented room on the edge of Moscow." Aisha's shoulders stiffened, but she did not look away. "That is why," she said softly. "I will never laugh at another person's gifts. I know what it costs to earn them." For a moment he seemed ready to retort, but the words did not come. Instead, he poured her a glass of tea, his movements precise, almost ceremonial. "You will work for me," he said. She inclined her head. "On what terms?" "My terms," he answered. But already she knew that whatever his terms were, she would set her own. The weeks that followed were filled with shadowed rooms, whispered negotiations, papers that smelled of ink and power. Aisha became the voice Sergei needed in places where his own could not reach. She sat at tables with men from Paris, Algiers, Beijing, and Dakar, and in each tongue she carried his words, but also weighed them. She noticed things he did not, glances exchanged, words chosen, truths hidden. More than once she caught Sergei watching her, not with suspicion now, but with something stranger, something almost vulnerable. "Yet," he said little of himself. He was a man built of stone, and she knew better than to think stone could be easily broken. But she also knew that silence holds its own secrets. And one night, when she returned to her small rented flat, she found an envelope slipped under her door. No signature. Only a single line written in Russian, the handwriting elegant, old-fashioned. Be careful with Malikov. He has buried more than money in his walls. The paper trembled slightly in her hands as she read it again. Be careful with Malikov. He has buried more than money in his walls. She stood in the dim hallway of her building, a flickering bulb casting a sickly light on the peeling wallpaper. Somewhere a neighbor's radio played an old chanson. Snow whispered at the windows, pressing close like a hand. She slipped the note into her coat pocket, without thinking. There was no signature, no scent, no trace of who had left it. But someone knew where she lived. Someone was watching. The next morning, she arrived at Sergei's headquarters earlier than usual. The building, a former bank with heavy granite columns, stood like a monument to another era. Inside, marble floors gleamed, and the air smelled faintly of wax and cold metal. She climbed the stairs to the top floor, where his private office occupied an entire wing. He was already there, seated at his desk, a cup of black coffee steaming beside his hand. He glanced up as she entered, but said nothing, only pushed a folder toward her. "French contracts?" he murmured. She worked in silence, pen moving across paper, translating clauses, noting discrepancies. But she could feel his eyes on her from time to time, measuring her expression. When she finished, she closed the folder with a muted click. "You're distracted," he said quietly. She met his gaze. "Just tired." He didn't believe her, she could tell. But he let it go, reaching for the samovar instead. Pouring himself tea, his movements deliberate. Later that day, during a lunch break, she stood by the window in the staff lounge, watching the snow fall onto the frozen river below. Two men in dark coats stood across the street, smoking. She couldn't tell if they were watching the building or simply passing time. But a cold ripple moved across her skin. When she returned to the office, Sergei was on the phone speaking in a language she couldn't immediately place. Not Russian, not French. The tone was low, urgent. When he noticed her in the doorway, he ended the call abruptly and set the receiver down. "We have a meeting tonight," he said. "Private. You will translate." We're? Here." His eyes flicked toward the interconference room. 7 o'clock. Wear something formal. That evening the building was nearly empty. The staff had gone, leaving only a security guard at the entrance. In the conference room, a long table was set with bottled water, files, and a discreet microphone. Sergei stood at the head, his hands clasped. Two men arrived first. One Algerian, one French. Both in dark suits, both with the wary posture of men used to negotiations that spilled over into threats. Aisha translated, her voice steady, her eyes moving between the men. She noted the way the Algerian's gaze flicked to Sergei's hands when money was mentioned. The slight tremor in the Frenchman's jaw. The talk turned to shipping routes, to tariffs, to quotas hidden in bureaucratic language. She translated everything with precision, but she also stored away what was unsaid. At one point, Sergei leaned close to her and whispered in Russian, "Do not translate the next sentence." She nodded once, but her stomach tightened. She was being made complicit. After the meeting ended, Sergei lingered in the doorway as the men left. He closed the door and turned back to her. "You're better at this than I expected," he said. "I told you?" She replied quietly. "Languages are keys." He studied her for a long moment, then said, "You're also learning to read people." "People are like languages too," she said. "Patterns. Inflections." He smiled faintly, but his eyes remained unreadable. "Be careful with patterns," he murmured. "They can lead you into places you can't leave." She thought of the note slipped under her door. "What places have you built?" "Sergey," she asked softly. He tilted his head, as if considering her question, then reached for his coat. "Some questions," he said, "are safer unanswered." Weeks slid by in a rhythm of contracts, negotiations, and careful observation. Aisha became indispensable, the silent conduit between worlds. Sergey began to trust her with documents no one else saw. She caught glimpses of bank accounts, property deeds, offshore agreements. But she also glimpsed the man himself. The wariness in his shoulders. The way he sometimes stared at a framed photograph on his desk of a much younger version of himself beside a woman whose face was turned away from the camera. One night, while reviewing documents alone in his office, she opened a drawer searching for a stapler and found an envelope of old letters tied with twine. They were written in Russian, but the paper was brittle, the ink fading. The first line of the top letter began, "To my daughter." She froze. But before she could read further, the door opened and Sergey entered. She closed the drawer swiftly. He said nothing, only gave her a look that seemed to pierce through the desk. "Working late?" he asked mildly. "Yes," she said. "Good." He walked past her to the window, his reflection in the glass blending with the dark city outside. "Tomorrow we go to the ministry. Bring the files." That night she could not sleep. The letter burned in her mind. "To my daughter." It could have been anyone's daughter. It could have been a business letter. But something about the handwriting felt intimate, almost familiar. She began to recall her mother's stories, the way she had avoided talking about her youth in Russia. The letters she had once burned in the kitchen sink, the quiet panic whenever certain names came up on the news. She remembered her mother's voice in Russian when she was smalls. Never believed that powerful men do you favors out of kindness. A month into her employment, Sergey invited her to a dinner at his private residence in Moscow. Not his office, but a house no journalist had ever entered. The house stood behind a tall fence, guarded by cameras and men with earpieces. Inside, everything was warm wood, Persian rugs, and low light. The kitchen smelled of roasted duck and black bread. At the table sat only Sergey and Aisha. No staff, no family photos on the walls, only icons and heavy curtains. He poured vodka into 2 small glasses and raised his own. "To survive," he said. She raised hers. "To survive." They drank. The vodka burned like fire down her throat. He leaned back, studying her. "Do you know why I keep you so close?" "Because I'm useful." "That's part of it." His voice softened. "You remind me of someone I once knew. Someone I failed." She didn't ask who. Instead, she cut a piece of bread, spread it with butter. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the tick of an old clock on the mantel. You're not like the others, he said finally. They all want something. You I can't read. She smiled faintly. Maybe you're not speaking the right language. He chuckled, a low sound. But his eyes were distant. Maybe not. Later that night, when she went to fetch her coat from the hall, she saw a door at the end of the corridor, slightly ajar. Inside was a dimly lit study with a single photograph on the desk. The same photograph she had glimpsed in his office. Only here the woman's face was visible. She had dark skin, high cheekbones, and eyes that could have been Aisha's own. She stepped closer. The resemblance was undeniable. Aisha. His voice behind her made her jump. She turned. Sergey stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. You're curious, he said quietly. She stopped. He stepped into the room, closed the door softly behind him. That was a long time ago, he said, nodding toward the photograph. But it seems the past is never past.
Who is she?
A woman I once loved, he said, and lost. Aisha's throat tightened. My mother? She whispered, before she could stop herself. He did not answer. Instead, he walked to the desk, picked up the photograph, and held it for a moment. Some truths, he said softly, are heavier than others. If you choose to look for them, be prepared to carry them. He set the photo down, brushed past her, and left the room. She left the study and walked back through the hall, the sound of her own footsteps oddly loud against the parquet floor. Somewhere in the house a clock struck midnight. Sergey had disappeared, leaving her alone with her questions. She found her coat and left without saying goodbye, slipping into the cold night air as if the snow itself might hush her thoughts. Back in her small flat, she placed the photograph in her mind like a piece on a chessboard, turning it over and over. She remembered being a child in Moscow. Her mother's hush when certain names were mentioned. She remembered an envelope of Russian banknotes, hidden behind the bread box for emergencies. It all began to line up like phrases in a language she hadn't yet translated. The next morning at the office, she tried to keep her expression neutral, but Sergey's glance told her he knew what she had seen. He didn't mention it. Instead, he dictated letters, asked for contract, and called her into a meeting with 2 German investors. She translated with the same precision as always, though inside she was restless, aware of every shift in his tone. At lunch she slipped out and called the only person she could think of. A retired journalist named Irina, who had been a friend of her mother's. They hadn't spoken in years, but when she explained who she was, Irina's voice softened. You're working for Malikov, Irina said. Be careful. That man's history is complicated. What do you know about him? Aisha asked. Not on the phone, Irina said. Meet me. Tonight. The Café Volna, Nevsky Prospect. 7. That evening Aisha arrived early, choosing a table in the back where the red velvet curtains sagged and the brass samovar hissed gently. Café Volna was one of those old Soviet-era establishments where time felt thick, the wallpaper faded, the menu unchanged for decades. She ordered tea and waited, watching the door. Irina arrived 10 minutes late, wrapped in a brown coat and a scarf knotted under her chin. Her face was lined but alert, her eyes darting. She sat, ordered black coffee, and leaned across the table. "Your mother," she said without preamble. "She left St. Petersburg when you were very young. Did she ever tell you why?" Aisha shook her head. "She said only that it was dangerous." Irina sighed. She and Sergei Malikov were close. More than close. But something happened. She fled. He stayed. He built his empire. No one knows the full story. Aisha's stomach tightened. "Do you think he's my father?" Irina's eyes flicked to the window, then back. "I don't know. But I know this. There was a child. You were a child. And Malikov's wife disappeared around the same time. Your mother stopped writing to me after she left. She never mentioned him again." Aisha stared into her tea. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you're in his house," Irina said bluntly. "Because you're translating his secrets. And because powerful men don't like ghosts from their past wandering their halls." They sat in silence for a moment, the cafe's low hum wrapping around them. Irina finally said, "If you're going to find the truth, don't confront him directly. He'll retreat. You have to look where he thinks you won't." "Where?" Aisha whispered. "His archives, the old wing of his office, the locked drawers, the safe." That night Aisha lay awake, her mind a jumble of languages and memories. She thought of Sergei's eyes when he'd seen her in the study, of the photograph, of the letter she'd glimpsed addressed to my daughter. She thought of her mother's hands, kneading dough, her father's stories of Dakar, her own sense of always being between worlds. She decided she couldn't keep drifting. She needed proof.
2 days, Clay.
Later, Sergei left for a meeting with government officials, leaving her alone in his office with a stack of contracts to translate. She worked quickly, finishing early, then crossed to the heavy desk and opened the drawer again. The letters were still there. Her hands shook as she untied the twine. The first letter was in French. She read, "My beloved Sergei, our child is strong. She speaks already in 3 tongues. She will be brilliant. But we cannot stay. It is not safe. I cannot watch her grow up under your shadow. Forgive me." Aisha's breath caught. She scanned the next page, but it was torn. Beneath lay another letter in Russian, her mother's handwriting unmistakable. "If one day she comes to you, remember she is innocent. She carries both our blood. Do not use her." Her fingers went numb. She was trembling when the door opened. Sergei stood there, snow still melting on his coat shoulders. He saw the letters in her hands and stopped. For a moment neither spoke. Then he closed the door behind him with a quiet click. "So you know," he said. Aisha set the letters down slowly. "Tell me." He walked to the window, looking out at the frozen city, his reflection ghostly in the glass. "I loved your mother," he said simply, "but I chose power over her." "Over you? She left." "I stayed." "Why didn't you tell me?" Her voice cracked. He turned, eyes hard. "Because you are useful to me," he said, then softened. "And because I didn't know how to approach a daughter I'd lost 20 years ago." She stared at him, the languages in her mind scattering like birds. "So everything, the job, the invitation, was it a test?" "Partly, he said. Partly it was guilt. Partly it was to see if you were really mine. She stepped back. And now. He moved closer, his expression unreadable. Now you know who you are. And you know who I am. The question is what you will do with it. She could smell the cold on his coat, the faint scent of tobacco and ink. Her heart hammered. I will decide for myself, she said finally. He nodded once, a soldier accepting a verdict. Good, he said softly. Decide, carefully. The days that followed were brittle with tension. Sergei didn't revoke her position, but he watched her differently, as if waiting for her to betray him. She did her work but began quietly copying key documents, sending them to a secure email she'd set up. She wasn't sure yet what she'd do with them, only that she needed them. Irina urged caution. If he senses you're gathering evidence, he'll shut you out, or worse. But Aisha felt a grim calm. She had crossed a threshold. The girl who'd stood in that marble hall, declaring her languages, was now learning a new one, the language of power, and how to dismantle it. One night Sergei called her to the office after hours. The building was empty except for them. He poured vodka and handed her a glass. You hate me? He said. I don't know what I feel, she said. He studied her. Your mother was braver than I was. She ran. I stayed. I built this life, but it's built on sand. You see that now? She didn't answer. He set his glass down. I'm giving you a choice. You can walk away now, with enough money to start your own firm, or you can stay and become part of this machine, but you cannot expose me. If you do, I will destroy you. Aisha's heart pounded, but her face remained still. I'm not afraid of you, she said quietly. He gave a small, sad smile. You should be. That night Aisha didn't sleep. She sat at the small kitchen table of her flat, with a mug of tea growing cold, the glow of her laptop casting a pale blue light across her hands. Outside, the snow fell heavier, blanketing the street below, muting the city into a muffled silence. The ultimatum Sergei had given her still rang in her ears. Walk away, with money or stay, and become part of his machine. She thought of her mother's letters, of the thin paper trembling in her hands. She thought of her father's voice, telling her, when she was a child in Dakar, never let them define you by what they give you. Define yourself by what you can take from the world. She opened the folder on her laptop where she had stored the scanned contracts, hidden correspondence, and her translations of his secret deals. She had enough evidence to destroy Sergei. His empire, if she survived long enough to release it. At work the next day, she sensed the shift immediately. Sergei's secretary wouldn't meet her eyes. Two of the guards, who usually stayed by the lobby, were gone. A new man in a gray coat lingered near the elevator watching her. Sergei himself kept his door closed. By mid-afternoon, she received a terse message on her phone. Conference room 4. Now, she entered the room slowly, every nerve alert. Sergei sat at the far end of the table, his coat still on, a cigarette burning in the ashtray beside him. He didn't offer her a seat. You've been copying documents, he said flatly. Aisha's mouth went dry. I've been doing my job. His eyes flicked to hers, cold and bright. Don't lie to me. I had you followed. You met Irina. You went into my drawers. Her heart raced, but she held his gaze. You're my father? She said softly. I had a right to know. His mouth tightened. That gives you no right to betray me. I'm not betraying you, she said. I'm trying to survive. For a moment he looked almost pained. Then he stubbed out the cigarette with a violent twist. Leave, he said. Get out before I change my mind. She hesitated. What are you going to do? He didn't answer. She packed her belongings from her desk, every movement deliberate. When she left the building, dusk had already fallen, and the streetlights cast long shadows across the snow. She walked fast, head down, aware of footsteps behind her. At her flat, she found the door ajar. She froze. Slowly, she pushed it open. The place had been searched. Drawers overturned, papers scattered, laptop gone. On the kitchen table, a single object lay neatly placed, the photograph of her mother she'd found in Sergei's desk. Its frame cracked down the middle. She backed out, heart hammering, and went straight to Irina's apartment across town. Irina let her in, locking the door behind her. You look like you've seen a ghost, she said.
They know.
Aisha whispered. He knows everything. They've taken my laptop. Irina poured her tea, her hands steady. I told you to be careful. I was careful. Aisha snapped, then forced herself to breathe. I need to get this information out. Do you know anyone? A journalist who won't sell me out. Irina hesitated. There's a man named Petrov. Old-school investigative reporter. He hates Malikov, but he's reckless. I'll be reckless, Aisha said. 2 nights later, she met Petrov in a dimly lit bar near the river. He was in his 50s, heavy, set, with a face like an old boxer. He listened without interrupting as she laid out what she had: the contracts, the offshore accounts, the letters. When she finished, he whistled softly. This would ruin him, he said. I'm not doing it for revenge, she said. I'm doing it because people need to know who he is. He looked at her for a long moment. Then you're braver than most, he said. But once we start, there's no turning back. I know, she said. What she didn't know was that Sergei had already set his own trap. That same night, Sergei sat alone in his office, a glass of vodka untouched at his elbow, the city lights flickering beyond the window. On his desk lay a file with photographs of Aisha meeting Petrov. He flipped through them slowly, his face unreadable. She's my blood, he murmured. And yet, he closed the file and picked up the phone. Do it, he said simply, and hung up. Aisha returned to Irina's apartment late, exhausted but determined. She'd handed Petrov a copy of the files and arranged a signal if anything happened to her, he would publish immediately. She thought it would be enough. She was wrong. The knock at the door came just before dawn. Irina, half asleep, went to answer it. Aisha heard a muffled shout, then a crash. She grabbed her coat and ran to the back, but 2 men in dark jackets were already inside. Miss Malikova, one said. You're coming with us. She lunged for the window, but they caught her arms, twisting them behind her. She kicked, but a sharp sting at her neck sent darkness flooding over her. She woke in a small room with no windows, only a single bare bulb overhead. Her head throbbed. The door opened and Sarjay entered alone. "You forced my hand," he said, quietly. "You drugged me," she croaked. "I protected you," he said. "Petrov will think you've disappeared. Irina, too. No one can touch you here." "You're insane," she said. "You can't keep me here?" He moved closer, his expression almost gentle. "I told you I built this on sand, but I built it nonetheless. If it collapses now, it takes us both. Stay here until it's over. I'll handle Petrov." "You'll kill him," she said. He didn't answer. She spent 3 days in the locked room, time dripping like water from a cracked pipe. Food arrived on a tray. The bulb buzzed overhead. She tried to sleep but couldn't. She tried to pray but her words were tangled. On the 4th day Sargai returned. "Petrov's gone quiet," he said. "Irina has fled." "You destroyed them?" she whispered. "I protected you," he repeated. "You're safe now." "Safe," she spat. "I'm your prisoner." He sat across from her, folding his hands. "You're my daughter," he said softly. "I want you to inherit what I've built." "I don't want your empire," she said. "I want my freedom." He sighed. "Then you'll have to take it." That night she faked an illness, waiting until the guard who brought her food bent close. She struck fast, knocking him off balance, grabbing his key card. By the time the alarm sounded, she was already down the corridor, her heart pounding like a drum. She burst through a side door into the icy night, snow cutting her cheeks like glass. She ran without looking back, through an alley, across a frozen yard, until she reached a main road. She flagged down a passing taxi with trembling hands and told the driver, first address. That came to mind. She ended up at a small Orthodox church on the outskirts of the city. Inside, candles flickered before icons of saints. She collapsed onto a wooden bench, her breath steaming in the cold air. A priest approached, but she shook her head, unable to speak. For hours she sat there, staring at the gold, painted faces of the icons, the smell of wax and incense thick around her. She thought of her mother, of Sargay, of the life she had tried to build. She thought of the languages she spoke, each one a world she had built for herself, a shield and a weapon both. And she understood then what she had to do. The snow had stopped falling, but the city was wrapped in a silence that felt heavier than any storm. Aisha stayed hunched over Petrov's battered laptop, her fingers trembling slightly as she typed, encrypting files, sending them through a web of anonymous accounts and dead end servers Petrov had set up over the years. The room smelled of instant coffee, cheap cigarettes, and tension. Petrov sat on the edge of a sagging sofa, his hands clasped between his knees. "It's all here," Aisha whispered. "The contracts, the bank, transfers, the offshore names, the letters from my mother. When it goes live, it goes everywhere at once." Petrov nodded. "We time it for dawn. That's when journalists in Paris, London, and Berlin will be awake. By the time Malikov knows, it will be too late to stop the first wave." Aisha sat back and rubbed her eyes. She hadn't slept properly in days. Her body was tired, but her mind felt sharper than ever. "Do you think he'll come after us?" Petrov gave a dry laugh. He already has. The question is whether we can stay a step ahead. Across the city, Sergei Malikov stood in his office with two phones pressed to his ear. His advisors talked over each other, offering plans, escape routes, and damage control. He listened, then ended the calls and poured himself a measure of vodka. He didn't drink it. He simply stared at the glass, the clear liquid trembling slightly in his hand. He thought of Aisha as a child, though he'd never seen her as a child, and of the letters he had hidden all those years. He thought of his wife's last words, her eyes hard as she left him. He had built his empire to be invincible, yet now it was threatened not by foreign governments or rival oligarchs, but by his own blood. "Daughter," he murmured. The word felt like ash in his mouth. Petrov had arranged a meeting with an old contact at a television network. They met in the back of a bakery where the smell of fresh bread hid the faint tang of fear. The contact, a sharp-eyed woman named Svetlana, took the USB drive and slipped it into her coat. "You've got maybe 12 hours before he realizes how much you've moved," she warned. "After that, you're on your own." "That's fine," Aisha said. Her voice was steady now. "Once the truth is out, it can't be undone." Svetlana looked at her with something like admiration. "You're risking everything." "I already lost everything," Aisha said. "This is just the reckoning." That night Aisha returned to the small church where she had hidden once before. She lit a candle, the flame flickering gold against the dark wood. Her reflection wavered in the glass case around the icon of the Theotokos. She closed her eyes. She prayed, not for victory, but for clarity, for the strength to bear whatever came next. In her head she heard the languages she knew, words for courage and truth in 9 tongues. They became like a chant, a shield. When she opened her eyes, a figure stood in the doorway. Sergei. He had come alone, without guards, without a coat. Snow clung to his hair, melting down his face like tears. "Aisha," he said quietly. She rose slowly. Her hands clenched, but she did not move toward him. "You shouldn't be here." He stepped closer, the old wood creaking under his boots. "You're going to destroy me," he said.
You destroyed yourself?
She answered. He lowered his eyes. "I came to ask you to stop." She laughed, a brittle sound. "After everything, I'll give you anything," he said. "Money, power, protection. I don't want any of it." He reached out a hand but let it fall. "Then at least don't become what I am. Don't lose your soul to vengeance." "I'm not doing this for vengeance," she said. "I'm doing it because people deserve to know." They stood there, two figures under the faint glow of candles, the icons watching like silent witnesses. Sergei looked suddenly old, his shoulders slumped. "I'm sorry," he said, so softly she almost didn't hear. At dawn, the first stories broke international headlines, investigative specials, a cascade of documents spreading across social media. The Malikov empire, long thought untouchable, was exposed in all its shadowy deals and stole millions. Offshore accounts frozen, contracts voided, prosecutors announcing inquiries. Petrov's phone buzzed constantly. Journalists called. Officials threatened. Isha sat on the floor of the apartment, watching the images flicker across the television. She felt no triumph, only a strange quiet. That same morning, Sergey left his office for the last time. He walked through the snow to his car, but instead of getting in, he turned and kept walking. His guards followed at a distance, unsure. He walked until he reached the frozen river and stood on the bank, looking out at the gray ice. He thought of his father, who had taught him never to beg. He thought of the little girl who had stood in that marble hall and spoken 9 languages like a hymn. He thought of all the doors he had locked, the keys he had hidden. Then he took off his gloves, feeling the ice, cold air burn his skin, and whispered a prayer in Russian, the words catching in his throat. 2 days later, the authorities issued a warrant for Sergei Malakov's arrest. His assets were frozen. His allies scattered. He had vanished. Aisha read the news and felt a tremor of grief despite everything. She went back to the church that evening, lighting another candle. She didn't know if he was alive or dead. She only knew she had ended the cycle he had started. Petrov joined her, hand shoved deep in his coat. "You're free," he said. She shook her head. Freedom isn't just about escaping someone. It's about deciding who you're going to be. After. Weeks passed. She began teaching languages at a community center, working with immigrants and refugees who reminded her of her own childhood. She found solace in the rhythm of the classroom, in the way a new word
Could light someone's eyes.
Sometimes at night she still dreamed of Sergei's voice, of his eyes when he had said, "I'm sorry." She woke with tears on her face, unsure if they were for him or for herself. But each morning she rose, walked through the snow, and began again, building a life on her own terms. One evening a letter arrived at the center, no return address. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a few words written in Russian. "I am still alive. I am learning the language of repentance. Thank you for teaching me silence." She read it 3 times, then folded it carefully. She didn't know where he was. She didn't know if she would ever see him again. But she knew he had finally begun to understand. She slipped the letter into a book on her desk, closed it, and turned back to her students, smiling faintly. The snow outside the window had grown so thick it erased the streetlights, turning the city into a blur of white and shadow. Aisha stood alone in the empty hall where it had all begun, her reflection faint in the black marble floor. The chandelier above no longer glittered with arrogance, but hung dim and silent like a relic of a fallen age. Somewhere beyond the city, Sergei Malakov was alive, stripped of his empire, learning the language of repentance he had once mocked. Aisha touched the photograph of her mother folded in her coat pocket and drew a slow, steady breath. She had dismantled his world with words instead of weapons, and in doing so had freed herself. But power leaves echoes. She knew the doors she had opened would never fully close, and the truths she had unleashed would continue to ripple outward, reshaping lives she would never see. As the candles burned low, she whispered a single word. A word of forgiveness in one of her 9 languages, and let it dissolve into silence. Somewhere far away, she imagined Sergei hearing it. Somewhere closer, the city itself seemed to listen. And in that moment, beneath the cold Russian sky, the girl who once stood mocked in a room full of millionaires was no longer just a linguist. She was the keeper of a truth, so powerful it had changed them all.